Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18, Jesus risen. First, I want to take a pause and notice that there's been a bit of discussion about what day of the week Jesus' crucifixion, resurrection, and resurrection appearances took place. There have some who call for a Wednesday, a Thursday, and then a Friday. The Friday one is more traditional. For the Friday, let me just say the scriptures state that Jesus was crucified or that he was raised on the third day after his resurrection, and the Jews commonly spoke of 3 days and 3 nights as any portion thereof. Um, but they also speak about, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John do this. They speak about how Jesus was brought down from the cross just prior to the Sabbath. Now, the discussion then entails on what kind of Sabbath was that. When you say the Sabbath and you don't explain, it's just the Sabbath. If I say it's the Sabbath day, everybody thinks, okay, that's Saturday, although the day would start at sundown on the previous day. There are those that look at Matthew chapter 12 and verse 40. This is where Jesus says, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so must the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And so they think, aha, see, 3 days and 3 nights, that means he couldn't have been crucified on Friday. It must have happened earlier. And then there are some who want to take that back even further and insist they take Matthew 12:40, referring to those 3 days and 3 nights, and it has to be a full 24-hour period so that Jesus was crucified, according to them, on Wednesday, and then didn't arise on the first day of the week, but on Saturday night. um, I think that's stretching it a bit. Actually, I think both of those are wrong. I'm a traditionalist when it comes to this. I think it's quite easy to see what the passage says. Um, Notice the views of Wednesday and Thursday hinge upon one passage, and that's a literal reading of a single verse, which is not a historical verse, it's a prophetic verse, and it's showing a comparison between Jonah and Jesus. And the Jews just didn't typically show that kind of attention to detail in those sorts of situations. So that the rest of the New Testament supports that Friday crucifixion, after which he had to be taken off the cross by the Sabbath, which would have begun that Friday evening. And then again, the scriptures are consistent to say, and then after the Sabbath, in the morning after the Sabbath, the women came to the tomb. That's pretty straightforward. That's the reason for the traditional view. Now, both the Wednesday and Thursday views reinterpret any mention of the Sabbath day to be a reference to the Passover. And John chapter 19 does say it was that Sabbath was a high day. Well, that means that the Sabbath day and the Passover took place on the same day, which I think it's 30 AD, they did take place on the same day. So that actually works in all sorts of ways. Um, Jesus was taken down from the cross just prior to the Sabbath. I put here Matthew 27, but actually a number of, I think maybe all four gospel accounts are going to say it that way. And then after the Sabbath, the women show up at the tomb, and because they had not wanted to do the work of coming and taking further care of the body during the Sabbath, so they rested on the Sabbath. And again, the scriptures specifically say that. And then after the Sabbath was over, the next day they come to the tomb. So I think it's pretty clear, not that this is an important thing, just a technical detail. Now we're ready to begin John chapter 20, verse 1. Now, on the first day of the week, of course, that would be what we call Sunday, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark and saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. Now, in this passage, it doesn't talk about the stone being rolled away, but that is mentioned in other passages, even though the Rolling Stone sort of tomb was a bit unusual, only held by the very, very wealthy. The idea of cutting out tombs, again, even that was for the fairly wealthy, but the big rolling stone and the one we're looking at, this is actually in Galilee. And so, but we have found some in the area of Jerusalem as well. So this is Mary Magdalene. We're told in Luke chapter 8 and verse 2, and also in Mark 16 and verse 9, in that section of Mark that has come under question because it was missing from some very early manuscripts. I'll talk about that in some other video. That isn't the time to do that. But in both of those passages, it talks about how Jesus had cast 7 demons out of Mary Magdalene. Now, that's not mentioned here. In fact, just her name is mentioned, and we had seen her already. But that's sort of the background. Now, it doesn't say that she was necessarily an evil woman, or some people have equated her with maybe a bad lifestyle. Well, having seven demons in you, that's not a good thing. Let me just say that. But we're not given any other details besides that as to her earlier life. And so she comes early to the tomb. Other gospel accounts will talk about other women as well. John's not going to do that except in almost a passing comment. We'll notice it, but if we weren't looking for it, we might actually miss it. He's aware of the other women. We're going to see that, but the camera is on Mary Magdalene and only upon her. By the way, what happens here, and every time the camera is on Mary Magdalene, we're going to see a use of what we call the historic present. You see how it's translated? She came early to the tomb. Think about when you're telling a story, or maybe sometimes you're telling a joke, and you describe it, just like I'm describing you telling the joke right now. I'm describing it in the present tense, how you tell the story. You didn't say, he told the story. You're telling the story, and I'm doing that as a historic present to sort of let your imagination take you there. And so we're supposed to be doing the same thing. The New American Standard, if you're reading this on an actual paper Bible, then it will have a little asterisk next to that word came, just to let you know that's a historical present. And John's going to do that every time the camera comes on Mary Magdalene as it begins here. So she comes early to the tomb, and she sees the stone already taken away, and historic present that's here. Verse 2, so she runs, I'm going to render it that way, and comes to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and says to them, and here's what she says, they've taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we, did you catch that? We do not know. So notice the conclusion isn't that Jesus has been raised from the dead. Her conclusion is that someone has taken the body away. And notice the we don't know where they have laid him. There's the other woman, but the camera's not on them, but John knows that they're there. And so we see both Mary and her companions going back to report specifically to Simon Peter and the other disciple. Now, there might have been others there as well, but the camera's only on Mary, Simon Peter, and this other disciple whom Jesus loved. Verse 3, so Peter and the other disciple, we're not going to get his name, and yes, I have my suspicions, and you probably do too, but we're going to honor the way that this is written here in this passage. So I'm just going to call him Peter and the other disciple. And they went forth, and they were going to the tomb. Apparently they knew which tomb, where it was. Verse 4, the two were running together, and the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter. It's not that it was a race, maybe he was just, Peter was a little slower. I can't help but think, Peter's usually the first one to dive in, to jump in. I think about him getting out of the boat and sinking in the water in the storm in the Sea of Galilee. Think about how often Jesus would ask a question, the other disciples would look around, Peter would just come right up with the answer. But here, Peter maybe is a bit delayed, whether he realized it or not. Maybe because, remember, he had denied even knowing Jesus. And there might have been, yes, it might be the other disciple was just faster, or it might be that Peter was a little hesitant for that reason. But he gets there nevertheless, and notice the other disciple stooping in and looking in. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. This is the other disciple, doesn't go in. After all, a tomb is by its very nature ceremonially unclean. So if he goes in, he's going to defile himself physically. You could always go wash up and go through a cleansing ritual, but maybe he doesn't want to do that. Just a natural reluctance. There's also the factor that the body's already been in there a bit, and bodies decompose rather quickly in spite of the spices. He might be worried about the smell, the odor, um, and I'm not sure if he's thinking necessarily disease. I remember one time, my wife and I were in an ancient graveyard, and there was a tomb that was happened to be open, and I got down on my hands and knees, by the way, you can't always just walk right in. They're not. It's not made for regular habitation. So in this case, not necessarily this one, but I had to get down on my hands and knees and crawl in. And my wife said, "Are you nuts? There could be diseases in there." She was willing to stoop over and look, but she didn't want to go in there. And maybe it wasn't a lot of wisdom on my part in doing that, but it turned out okay. So in any case, we have the other disciple stooping and looking in. We get to, but he doesn't go in. And so Simon Peter also came following him and entered the tomb. He goes right on in, and he saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth which had been on his head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. So it wasn't just scattered about; it looked like there was a little orderliness, at least to the face cloth. Now it doesn't say the wrappings were folded, but the face cloth was, and it's an interesting detail that Peter noticed, and the other disciple, well, he's going to join. Notice what happens. Verse 8. So the other disciple who had first come to the tomb then also entered. It might have been a little crowded in there. This isn't meant for people to just go in and hang out. But he goes in and he saw and believed. Now, here's the question. What did he believe? Is he believing that Jesus rose again from the dead? Is he believing that Mary's report was accurate? We're not specifically told, but notice we are told, verse 9, for as yet they did not understand the scriptures that he must rise again from the dead. So did he believe the report of Mary? Was he believing that Jesus had risen? We're not sure. And maybe he wasn't even sure what he was believing. But he sees and he's struck by this and he takes it in. Notice they did not understand the scripture. They hadn't put it together yet, or at least up to this point. Are they beginning to now? We're not specifically told. Verse 10, so the disciples went away. This is Peter and the other disciple, again to their own homes. And they take off. They're gone, but now the camera is going to come back to Mary. And so, verse 11, but Mary was standing outside the tomb. It didn't want to necessarily go in. Didn't remember it's not built for long-term habitation. It would be sort of crowded and uncomfortable in there. So she's outside the tomb, weeping. And as she wept, she stooped and looked into the tomb, and she saw. Now, remember, the other disciple had stooped and done the same thing. That was probably the natural way to see into the tomb. And she looks and she saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been lying. Now, notice again, because this is Mary's story, we're hearing that historical presence. So go with her as she now was standing, as she is standing, and as she stoops and as she looks, and she sees these angels. Now, did she recognize them as angels? Did they look like angels? I can think of times where there are cherubim, for example, pictured in the statues of these over the Ark of the Covenant, and also in Solomon's temple. where they had been pictured having wings. And again, there's that section of Isaiah chapter 6 that talk about the seraphim, a different kind of angel, but with multiple wings that would both fly and cover their face and feet and things like that. But um, we're not told what these angels look like. Did Mary recognize them immediately as angels? What did they look like? We're not told. But notice one at the head and one at the feet, where the body had been, but now there's just a stone slab. And this imagery of having one at the head, one at the feet, at either end of this stone slab, as she sees them, reminds me a little bit of the description of the Ark of the Covenant and its lid that had the statues of two angels, now in that case with their wings. Did these angels have wings? I don't know. We're not told that. We're not given much information. But I can't help but think of the imagery of the Ark of the Covenant signifying the presence of God. And here was the place where the body had been, the body signifying the place of the presence of God, but now resurrected. And Mary is seeing this, and we're seeing it through her eyes. Verse 13, and they said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? She says to them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. She's still not thinking resurrection. She's still thinking body removal. And so she's still, that was her initial conclusion. She has not departed from that conclusion, even seeing these two angels, messengers, in whatever form they were looking. When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there and did not know that it was Jesus. So she sees these two individuals inside the tomb, and then someone comes up and she looks and sees him but doesn't look at his face. Now you say that's bizarre. Well, maybe not too bizarre when you're not expecting. I remember one time, this is back in my firefighter days, I was on scene at the seaport where I had my station. This is in my early days of firefighting, before I was an officer, and just controlling some traffic there. And my wife just happened to have driven into the area. She had actually taken a wrong turn, and she drives right up to me, sees somebody in uniform, but didn't look at my face, didn't notice it was me. And she started to pass by, and I yelled at her, and Paula, and she slammed on the brakes with a jerk, and luckily didn't hit anything, and then realized it was me. And so Mary does the same thing, and did not know that it was Jesus. And so she sees him, but not his face. And again, this is that historic present that's being used. Jesus said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Supposing him to be the gardener, and notice the question, who are you seeking? This reminds me a little bit of the very first time that we ever saw Jesus. Do you remember that? Way back in John chapter 1, where two of the disciples of John the Baptist had overheard John the Baptist saying, There is the one, there goes the Lamb of God. And they had come to him in John 1:38. They came up to Jesus, and he turned to them and he said, What are you looking for? What is it you want? What are you seeking? And they weren't sure how to answer that. So they said, Lord, where are you staying? I think they wanted a bit more than that. But again, Jesus asked now that same question. I want you to see how we've come full circle from beginning all the way to the end of the story. And this is the end of the story, even though we're going to have one more chapter as a postlude. This is the end of the story. Whom are you seeking? Supposing him to be the gardener, and this is a reminder that the salvation story started in a garden. There was a garden called Eden where the human race got into trouble, and now we come full circle to one she thinks to be the gardener because there's a garden there, and we're at the end of the story. Say, I thought the end of the story was at the cross. No, he was raised for our justification, the scriptures say. So yes, this is the end of the story. Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, um, "Sir, if you've carried him away." And so it's a reminder that the first Adam was a gardener, and Jesus came to do what the first did not, to, can I say it this way, to grow a new world. And so she says to him, "Sir," Lord is the Greek term, Kyrie, "if you have carried him away," and she's assuming that that's the case, is what's called a first-class condition. You say it, you can say if, and you can mean a couple different things by it. You say if in the first class with the indicative mood, and you're assuming that it is true. If you have carried him away, and I'm assuming that you have, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. I'll dispose of the body. I don't know what she's got in mind. Maybe that Jesus had been put into this new tomb that didn't belong to him, or was it grave robbers, or somebody looking to just relocate the body? What is it? But she's planning on fixing it, whatever it is. He says to her, "Mary," and she turns and says to him in Hebrew. So notice, he mentions her name, and she recognizes him by this. This reminds me of John chapter 10, verses 3 and 4, where Jesus had said, "The sheep hear his voice," and he calls his own sheep by name a little bit further in verse 4, "and the sheep follow him because they know his voice." Mary hears the voice, and now she recognizes him. She knows him. She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which is, now it says Hebrew here. Technically, it's Aramaic, and Rabboni would be my teacher. But this works, teacher. And the New Testament doesn't always distinguish between Hebrew and Aramaic. They're languages that had grown apart. Um, Technically, the way we read them today, two different languages, but related, and one had sort of sprung out of the other. In the same way that you can look at Portuguese and Spanish and Italian, and they're all just the way the Latin language took a number of different forms. Same sort of thing here. Well, verse 17, Jesus said to her, "Stop clinging to me." And notice he says to her, "Stop clinging to me." Now, when he says that, "stop clinging," I know that the old King James rendered it, "don't touch me." But what we have here is the present imperative of hapto. Hapto would be to touch, but it's when you give a negative with a present imperative, then it's one of the meanings it can have is to stop doing it. And I suspect that the New American Standard is correct here. That he's not like a soap bubble that if you touched him, he's going to burst or something like that. But rather, that's it. Stop, because there's more to be done. Notice, "For I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brethren." Now, notice he calls it my brethren that you're going to go to. Is that his literal brothers? No, I think that he's talking about his disciples, and she's going to take it as such because that's what she's going to do. "Go to my brethren and say to them," and notice the reason they're called his brethren is because of the following phrase: "I ascend to my Father and your Father," that makes us brothers, "and my God and your God." And you say, "Well, isn't Jesus, isn't he divine?" John chapter 1, verse 1, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Yes, but still, Jesus can say, and did say upon the cross, "Father, into your hands I submit my spirit. And my God, why have you forsaken me?" So he's both son, and also, but he's more than that. But it's the sonship that is being seen here. And notice, because of faith, that the disciples, and if you're one of his disciples, you are his family, his brothers and sisters. So yes, that works for you as well. Well, Mary Magdalene came, announcing to and notice it's still historic present. She comes, announcing to the disciples, "I've seen the Lord," and that he had said these things to her. And so she makes the announcement. Now, the term here, announcement, works great, but angelusai, is the present participle, and it's translated here as a participle, so great translation. But notice, angelo is the word not only from which we get our word angel and message or messenger, but also it's the term that if you put the little prefix "u" in front of it, "u" is the Hebrew word or the Greek word for good, then euangelo is to evangelize or to gospelize, and euangelion is the word for gospel. Now, you don't have that word gospel here. It's just announcing, works really fine. But I want you to capture that idea that the very first one to give the good news, and it doesn't call it that, but to give the news of Jesus' resurrection, not just that the tomb is open, not just that the body is missing, but that he has risen, is Mary Magdalene. And she becomes our first post-resurrection evangelist. It reminds us of 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands. And remember, stop touching me. I think perhaps she had done all of those things concerning the word of life. And now she shares that word of life with others. And that much we get to do as well.